And now it's my pleasure and gift to be able to introduce our speaker. Shantha Reddy Alonso has served as Executive Director of Creation Justice Ministries since 2015. Creation Justice Ministries is a membership organization of more than 30 Christian denominations, communions, and fellowships. It's the eco-justice partner to the National Council of Churches USA. That mission is to educate, equip, and mobilize Christian communities to protect, restore, and rightly share God's creation. Shantha has arranged numerous stakeholder meetings between people of faith and their policymakers. Shantha's ministry has been featured in The Hill, Sojourners, NPR, Religion News Service, U.S. Catholic, and various podcasts. And as Leela mentioned, Just Faith Ministries will be collaborating with Creation Justice Ministries on those eco-justice programs that Leela mentioned. So it's a real pleasure and a delight to welcome Shantha to our gathering this evening. So Shantha, microphone is all yours. Thank you for being here.
All right. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for the invitation, and I'm so grateful for this partnership. Our partnership, I had always known about Just Faith, but the thing that really made our partnership take off was that a Just Faith graduate came and became a volunteer for Creation Justice Ministries. Dr. Jim David has been an awesome part of our team for a few years now. And he was the one who really thought, Creation Justice Ministries could do more with Just Faith. You should really explore that partnership. And now look at how it's growing. It's very exciting. I want to share with you just the quick agenda of what I'm planning for the next 30 minutes. So I'm going to start our time together with a land acknowledgement, which is a practice that we do to increase reverence and sense of place in community gatherings. Some of you may be familiar with it. And then I am planning to add to the originally planned programming that we had to talk about racism between COVID-19 and the brutal deaths of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor. The general public is definitely waking up to vast inequities in our society, or in the case of many people in Just Faith, just feeling them more acutely, even though you may have been awakened to them in the past. And so I want to make sure that I don't let this time, which I really feel is a Kairos moment, pass without offering some quick witness on these timely issues. Then we'll move into our originally planned National Ocean Month material. And then last but not least, I will follow up by sharing some information on how to get connected with the Creation Justice community. Sound like a plan? All right, so I'm seeing nodding heads, so we'll move ahead. So I want to begin in a spirit of truth and healing, as well as a spirit of reverence for the Coachella Valley, which is the physical place from which I share with all of you into this virtual world. And I acknowledge the first peoples to call the Whitewater River watershed home, the Cahuilla people. This watershed is also home to a variety of species, including bighorn sheep, roadrunner, palo verde trees, and teddy bear cholla. Between the Mexican-American War in the 1840s, the California Gold Rush in the 1850s, and the forced removal of land rights, among other things, to make way for railroads, these things have robbed Cahuilla people of their ancestral homelands and way of life. And today, there are bands of Cahuilla Indians that continue to make their home here in the Coachella Valley, including Agua Caliente, Morongo, Mission Creek, Augustine, Cabazon, and Torres Martinez. And our watershed has become that of the Salton Sea, a body of water that resulted from an irrigation system breakage in 1905. And it has filled the ancient footprint of the prehistoric Lake Cahuilla. In making this acknowledgement, I hope to continue making visible Indigenous peoples and places, historically and contemporarily, as part of our shared work towards equity, as well as social and eco-justice transformation. Also, before we go into talking a bit about Creation Justice Ministries' racial justice perspective, I want to share a beautiful poem with you. And I wondered about sharing this poem, and I think our small group time actually validated just many of us are feeling grief and pain and anxiety right now, and I want to affirm and acknowledge that the strong feelings are here and they have a place here. And so I would like to share with you this poem. It's called Tidal Pools. Tears, like all prayers, trickle downhill to the sea. where they mingle with salted sorrows of ancient seasons. Each holy drop sanctifies the deep, and vice versa. Mutual immersion, a recompense, a communion. Tears, like all prayers, find their way home. So, as I shared earlier, I believe that we're in a kairos moment as a country. It's a time set apart when a divine inbreaking is happening, and more people are awakening to the widespread harm being inflicted by what Jim Wallace calls America's original sin, the sin of racism. And this is showing up in COVID-19 and who is disproportionately affected, as well as in police violence and white supremacist violence against Black people. Much of the racial justice analysis that Creation Justice Ministries has done revolves around our introspection about the continuing legacy of the Christian doctrine of discovery. And many Christians do not know about this difficult part of our church history because we do not learn it in school or in Sunday school or at church. And perhaps maybe somebody learned about this in a Just Faith curriculum. I know there was one on racism recently. But I'm actually curious where everyone is at on the doctrine of discovery, and I would also like to make this time interactive. If you would be willing to just punch into the chat box, is the doctrine of discovery something you have heard of before? Yes, or maybe it sounds familiar, or no. Maybe we can just see where everybody's at, and I'll pause and see the chat. And Layla, I actually can't see the chat while I'm sharing my screen. Would you mind letting me know more or less?
Yes, Shantha. Overall, it's looking like most people have not heard of the term. I see a few yeses coming in. A few sounds familiar, but I don't know. But overall, it seems to be that most folks have not heard of it.
Okay, so I do a long presentation on this, and I'm going to do a very short version about this right now. But I want to let you know that if you're interested in this, this is something Creation Justice Ministries works on, and we're glad to offer more information. So racism in the church and the environmental movement are, it's something that Creation Justice Ministries believes is an issue that we should center. And so we have looked at the Christian doctrine of discovery as one of the most important roots of much of the racist evils that we witness today, as well as ecological devastation. So it is the false doctrine of discovery that originated in the expansion of Christian empire, and many communities today have repudiated it or named it as a heresy. But too few Christians have heard of it or know its impact. So the doctrine of discovery originated in papal bulls issued in the 15th century, and they came out of the Vatican. They're from the Pope at that time, a few popes actually. And these documents basically stated that European Christian men had the right to quote unquote discover places and claim them as property. So this is what Columbus had with him when he came to the Americas. And I want to share with you a piece of art that exhibits the kind of mindset that goes with the doctrine of discovery. It is an example of the Christian mythology that is tied up with the beginnings of the United States as we know it today, as well as church history embodied in this doctrine of discovery. You've probably seen this kind of art in other places. I went to the University of Notre Dame, and the main building under the Golden Dome is filled with images of Columbus, kind of like this, in glorified places. There are more images that I could share on these themes, but I believe our society is overloaded with images of violence right now, so I'm just going to share this one today. So the doctrine of discovery states, that if inhabitants of discovered lands were not converted to Christianity, that the colonists had the right to put them into perpetual slavery. And this doctrine was used by colonists throughout the Americas and Africa. And in the United States, white colonists and settlers used the doctrine to justify the forced displacement and genocide of indigenous peoples, enslavement or sending to boarding schools of some indigenous peoples, as well as the widespread adoption of using enslaved African laborers and engaging in the slave trade. The doctrine of discovery includes a concept that's very important to Creation Justice Ministries work called terra nullius, which means that the land is empty, or it is because it is not being productive by the standard of the Europeans who wrote this doctrine. And this concept of productivity relates to the land being used for agriculture or extraction of minerals or for settlements. The land had to be made productive in some way. So terra nullius led to a widespread disregard not only for indigenous peoples' right to live on their ancestral land as the original caretakers of God's creation who understood how to live in harmony with the lands and waters, but also for the rich existing reciprocal communities of other species that were functioning in ecosystems. The perception is that nothing was going on there. This is empty land, but that is anything but true for anybody who spends time in the natural world. You can see that. And today we see that 1 in every 5 species on Earth is either threatened or endangered. As we clear habitat, we disrupt viruses residing in animal hosts, and they need a new host, and they find human hosts. This is true of the novel coronavirus, as well as SARS and Ebola and HIV/AIDS. Our climate is so severely damaged that we're regularly experiencing now wildfires and floods and hurricanes and invasive species in a way that we've never experienced as a human race before. And meanwhile, the societal structures that devalue the lives of non-white people, and particularly Indigenous and Black people, continue to be perpetuated in all kinds of ways. Including persistent environmental racism, which is something that Creation Justice Ministries really focuses on. The 1986 landmark report, Toxic Waste and Race, was commissioned by the United Church of Christ, and it showed that when social scientists account for other measures, including economic inequality, the toxic extraction, production, and dumping sites are disproportionately located in communities of color. This disproportionately impacts people with burdens of sickness and exposure to toxics. Asthma, cancer, reproductive harm, and heart failure are just a few things that are related to being exposed to these toxins, and the burden is disproportionately in communities of color. And then we have to also look at the environmental movement's racism issues. So when our attempts to solve problems, profound environmental problems, and we fail to account for racial justice issues, we also have serious problems. So for example, the concept of terra nullius has made its way into the conservation movement. The idea that we have to protect pristine wilderness where no inhabitants dwell is very hurtful to Indigenous peoples. And they, in some cases, they were pushed off of their ancestral homeland to make way for national parks. And people of color, particularly Black people, too often look at conservation movements and think about how they do not feel safe outdoors and wonder, well, for who exactly are we conserving these places? Like when you say, let's conserve the land for future generations, whose future generations? And these are conversations that the conservation movement, by and large, has failed to seriously grapple with, and Creation Justice Ministries works hard to advance those conversations. Through the lens of doctrine of discovery, we also have a deeper understanding of how the devaluing of God's creation and communities of color are interconnected, and our responsibility as Christians to confront these pervasive and sinful racist mythologies continue to shape our laws and our culture and our theology today. So please know that the Creation Justice Ministries team is available if you want to go deeper into some of the analysis that we have done that really shapes the way that we do our work. We have found it to be really important to delve into this theme. So with that was very heavy, and you also got the abridged version, so it was very intense. So I'd like to take a moment and just give some feedback in the chat box. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to verbally give you a prompt. And actually, Layla, if I could ask you to type the prompt into the chat box, I think that would help some people. So the first prompt is, it makes me ... And I want you to quietly think to yourself what you just heard, and to think about racism and what's going on now, and think about how you respond to the prompt, it makes me, but hold back your response until I say, put it in the chat box, and then we'll all put it in the chat box at the same time. So it makes me, hold off on hitting enter. And go ahead and hit enter, put it in the chat box. Okay. And Layla, you could let me know when the responses slow down and I'll give the next prompt.
They're slowing down.
Okay, thank you. The next prompt is, I have to. So think about your response to the prompt, I have to, and hold it. And go ahead and share it in the chat now. And the last prompt is, when all is said and done, when all is said and done. And I invite you to hit enter, share it in the chat box. Thank you. I hope that was a good chance to just reflect together on what's happening now and how we're all feeling. Layla, can you please let me know when they slow down?
Yes, they've slowed down.
Great. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to invite you to now take a deep breath and shift gears. And I'd like to share with you a video that is of the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts Marine National Monuments. This is a special place, and I think I promised you all in the description for my time with you that I would take you on a trip to explore God's marine creation. So here it is, and I'll go ahead and hit play.
confirm the truthfulness of his word. O Christ, our God, who hast revealed thyself and hast enlightened the world, glory to thee. When thou, O Lord, was baptized in the Jordan, the worship of the Trinity was made manifest. For the voice of the Father bare witness to thee, and called thee his beloved Son, and the Spirit in the form of a dove confirmed the truthfulness of his word. O Christ, our God, who hast revealed thyself and hast enlightened the world, glory to thee.
So that was our little trip that we took together to the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts Marine National Monuments. And I'd like to spend some time now talking about caring for God's marine creation in honor of Ocean Month. I hope those 3 minutes shifted your mindset and that you felt a spark of wonder or joy. The healing power of God's creation is really amazing, and it's something that really motivates me to protect creation is when I feel that wonder and that sense of connection. So it's National Ocean Month, and for some of us, the ocean feels very near. For others of us, not so much. To share with each other in the chat box again, I would like to know if you live within 50 miles of a coast or not. So just let me know in the chat box if you are near a coastal community or if the ocean is far, far away. And today, nearly 40% of the world's population lives within 62 miles of a coastline. So a significant number of us do live in coastal areas. And I want to share with you a couple of maps. They're not quite ready for prime time, but one of our amazing interns, Avery Davis-Lamb, is doing some GIS mapping work for us on sea level rise issues and storm surge issues in coastal communities. So in front of you, you see his initial mapping efforts for the Virginia Beach, Norfolk area, as well as the Outer Banks. And the image that you see on the left are names of lots of churches that are in the coastal area. And then the image that you see on the right is the anticipated sea level rise for that area. And if you notice the little crosses, you can see that many churches, those are churches that are signified by little black crosses, are in the sea level rise zone. So there are going to be churches that are underwater. And so we need to address this issue head on. We need to look both at mitigating climate change by doing what we can now to make sure that we don't feel the worst of climate disaster. And we also need to prepare our communities to be resilient to what's to come. And so Creation Justice Ministries is very involved in this work. So a lot of people don't know, but the ocean is actually our most effective buffer against climate change. Every year, the ocean absorbs many of our carbon emissions. The ocean also produces half of the oxygen that we breathe. So even if you live far away from the coast, you are enjoying half the oxygen you're enjoying is generated from phytoplankton and other sources in the ocean, which is pretty amazing. So we have a lot of reasons to make sure that we invest in protecting God's marine creation. And a lot of us are not focused on it because of immediate issues. And I thought this cartoon was interesting to put things in perspective. Right now, we're talking about flattening the coronavirus curve, and a lot of us do not have our eye on other curves that we need to be looking at. So we're preparing ourselves for climate justice. So there are 6 strategies for ocean climate action that Creation Justice Ministries works with our secular coalition partners to pursue. One is to stop the expansion of offshore drilling, which is extremely damaging, both to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and also to protect really vulnerable marine ecosystems and coastal communities that rely on those areas for spiritual as well as economic sustenance. We also support increasing ocean-based renewable energy. So this needs to be done thoughtfully and with marine ecosystems in mind so that we don't disrupt very delicate places. But it can be done well, and it can be an effective strategy. We also need to manage fisheries sustainably. So much of God's marine creation, God's marine creation can give, but it can't give and give to the point where there's no place and time to regenerate. And so fisheries need to be managed thoughtfully so that, as Patriarch Bartholomew put it, so the miracle of the fishes will endure for future generations. Another huge issue is plastic pollution. It's estimated that if we keep going at the rate that we are, there will actually be more plastic than fish in the ocean, which is just very difficult to even imagine. But that is the trajectory that we're on unless we really change things. And so Creation Justice Ministries is working with communities to reduce single-use plastic use. But the truth is, I find it very difficult, and there needs to be some systemic solutions where manufacturers are responsible for the next step about what happens to their products after we're done using them, right? They need to make sure that they are taking responsibility for whatever recycling needs to happen, or what is the end use goal of a product, because it's not possible for us to individually take responsibility for it. And also, China is done with taking most of our plastic recycling, and that's a huge problem here. So some of the amazing climate benefits of a healthy ocean that I mentioned earlier are in special marine ecosystems that really need our protection, and we need to support and grow those. Mangroves, salt marshes, and seagrasses are some of the most amazing miracles of creation that deserve our investment and support. And then this is the campaign that I'm going to spend some time talking about, and that is the effort to protect 30% of the ocean by 2030. Actually, big picture, it's 30% of the natural world by 2030. So 30% of the whole planet needs to be under some sort of conservation protection. So let's talk a little bit more about marine protected areas. A marine protected area, currently they cover about 6% of the ocean. We'd like to get to 10% this year, but that's pretty difficult, and 30% by 2030. It's a marine protected area is a part of our ocean that has special protections. They vary in sizes. They're not all created equal. And in the US, they're heavily concentrated on the West Coast. So I'm going to speed through these because I'm aware, and Layla, please do keep me on time. Features of marine protected areas, they can vary in the amount that the protection exists, but a key issue is definitely commercial fishing. These areas are important because they're safe havens, especially for delicate species. And so the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts that you saw the video of is one example of a marine protected area. And it's an important habitat for endangered species such as the right whale and Kemp's Ridley sea turtle. It's roughly 130 miles off the coast of Cape Cod. Unfortunately, we lost conservation protections against heavy-duty commercial fishing just recently. On World Environment Day, President Trump signed a proclamation reversing some conservation protections for the area. But we do have an active petition, which I will share with you, to restore those protections. And then the campaign to save nature, 30% by 2030. It's an initiative that's part of the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. Scientists are telling us it's really the bare minimum that we need to do. So even though it sounds big and ambitious, the world is really campaigning to get on board with it. There is US legislation to pursue this goal, and actually thoughtful policymakers and scientists have worked together to map out how this is a possible goal, but we do have to get serious about it. Conservation must be done in consultation with local governments, with tribal nations, and we are on our way there, but not there. So I also wanted to note for you all that there's an important study that recently came out called Heartwired to Love the Ocean. And I wanted to give a shout out for what I was excited about, that faith communities have a really important role in ocean conservation. Because one of the most important things in the general population that draws people to wanting to protect the ocean is that the ocean is God's beautiful creation. This is the language that people used, that they summed up in various focus groups and surveys. And so I'll quickly go over the 6 mindsets. Other mindsets are engaging the senses, engaging with amazing wildlife, the power of law to protect the ocean for future generations, feeling at peace by the ocean, which is also a heavily spiritual theme, and then family traditions, which also can be a very spiritual theme. So again, I want you to just type into the chat box. You already did where you're from. You can reiterate it. It might help with your answer. Which mindset do you most identify with? And then one community that you'd like to share with about what you learned today through this lens, this motivating lens. And while you're punching into the chat box, I'm going to keep going and give you a quick tour of Creation Justice Ministries resources that are available for you. So since most of us are at our computers, if any of you use the bookmark function on your computer, I highly recommend that you go to creationjustice.org/action and bookmark this page. This is a page that we update every month with new material. It has some long-lasting advocacy materials, such as how to contact your decision makers, how to get published, some community organizing tips, a toolkit on how to testify at a public hearing. This stuff is here all the time. And then there's a red button in the upper corner that says Action Center. That one is updated every month with timely material that is relevant for your community. So if you run a faith sharing group, a justice group, where you would like to share timely material, this is a great source. creationjustice.org/action. And this is a little preview of what last month's Action Center looked like. Has, an action in the upper left corner. There's always a bulletin insert. We note special days, like for example, last month was Endangered Species Day, things like that. We also have a quarterly newsletter called Capsules, and if there's something exciting going on in your community that you think the Creation Justice community should know, email us. We often feature that stuff on social media as well as in our newsletter. We offer the variety of services for faith communities, including guest speaking, civic education, advocacy opportunities. We're about to roll out in a couple of weeks a policy brief center on our website that should be really interesting, that shows the intersection between Christianity and bedrock environmental laws and how they reflect our values. And then we have so many Christian education resources that are free for download. Of course, we love donations if you like the materials, but they're available to you for free download on our website. So thank you again to Just Faith for the time to share with all of you. And I guess I'll pass it back to Layla and Jack if we have a little time for Q&A or for closing out.
Sure. I invite anybody who has a question to send it to me, and I'll be glad to sort of sort through them and pick a couple out for Shantha before we conclude tonight.
And I'm finally getting to go back in the chat and see your responses. Thank you for responding.
So Shantha, if you want to tackle the practical question, are there local chapters? And then this notion of divine inbreaking. Yeah.
Oh, great. So Creation Justice Ministries does not formally have local chapters. Usually, because we're a membership organization of Christian denominations, communions, and fellowships, many of our members have existing affiliate programs that they do through their own faith community, and then we liaise with them. So a few of them actually cross-branded with us and coordinate programming with us. The American Baptist Churches USA, the Alliance of Baptists, and the United Church of Christ have Creation Justice Churches programs where your church can sign up, and there's a community within those denominations for connecting with each other. And then with others, the Presbyterian Church USA has a Earth Care Congregations program. So those are the types of programs that we tend to connect with. I have gotten that request before, and so I have thought about whether we need to respond to that need, but I'm also aware that I don't want to duplicate things that our member denominations are already doing. So thank you for the question. And then the question about the concept of kairos. So kairos is a Greek word that comes out of the Gospel of John, and it has to do with a sense of divine timing and the coming of Jesus, actually. So the right actions happening at the right time, which is different than the Greek concept of chronos, which is like the seconds ticking on a clock. So when I talk about being in a kairos moment, when a divine inbreaking can happen, I'm talking about a unique time in history when things are really shifting in a profound way, and God is in this. I really feel that way.
Shantha, maybe last question of the night. It kind of interests me as a former farmer. A gentleman named Chuck writes, I heard that farming kelp removes CO2 from the ocean. Do you know if there are plans for more underwater farming?
Aquaculture is a huge and growing industry, and I'm not an expert on it, but I know that there are ecologically smart ways to do it, and there are really ecologically destructive ways to do it. And those issues are very quietly being addressed. There's not a huge constituency tracking them. It's something I'm interested in, and if you're interested in more information, I can connect you to people who track those issues.
Shantha, thank you. I'm aware of time, and we try to commit ourselves to an hour. We're not too strict about that, but I want to bring us to a close. Shantha, again, thank you so much for being with us. It's such a pleasure, and we're looking forward to the partnership of working together on these resources. So again, thank you for being with us tonight. And if I can invite everybody, you can't unmute yourself, but you can put your hands together and show Shantha that you appreciate her presentation.
Thank you, everyone.
And I'll close with a very brief reflection from Nelson Mandela. The time for healing of the wounds has come. The time to build is upon us. We pledge ourselves to liberate all our people from the continuing bondage of poverty, deprivation, suffering, gender, and other discrimination. There is no easy road to freedom, and none of us acting alone can achieve success. We must therefore act together as a united people for reconciliation, for the birth of a new world. Amen. And good night, everybody. Thank you for being with us.
Amen. Thank you.